quick preamble before I get into this video. My original plan was to have relevant footage from each game as I speak about it and actually record a little bit of gameplay footage from each game as it became relevant. But unfortunately, I am currently unable to do that. I'm struggling a little bit with a medical issue that makes it very difficult for me to sit at my desk for long periods of time and actually get the footage that I need. So I apologize for that. It's not out of laziness, it's just because of that. So with that out of the way, let's just get started. Back in 2020, I started keeping a list of all the games that I completed during that year. I did the same for this year as well, but as I do occasionally, I felt the urge to make a video that wasn't a YouTube poop for a change, and usually that ends up being a Q&A. This time, however, I decided to do something a little bit different. For this year's special, I'll be doing a short review of every game I finished in 2024. I won't be giving them a rating, just sort of a brief retrospective on each game in the order that I played them. In order to talk about Yakuza 6 properly and really do it justice, I would have to give an overview of the entire series. And since that's not really what this video is about, I'll just say Yakuza 6 was an excellent game. I thoroughly enjoyed it all the way through. It was an excellent culmination of everything the series had been doing gameplay-wise and narratively throughout its entire run. Thoroughly enjoyed it. That aside, there's not much I can say about 6 other than it's a Yakuza game. But that alone is about as high praise as I can give it, because I love me some Yakuza. A bite-sized horror game by the Japanese indie developer Chilla's Art. This particular game might not be my favorite of their catalog, but if you're a fiend for horror games that aren't trend-chasing shovelware like I am, you'll probably enjoy it at least enough to justify the investment. I will, however, strongly recommend that you play The Convenience Store or Closing Shift if you want an example of what I think is their best work. They're all fairly short and only cost a few bucks, so do with that what you will. Despite being a huge fan of Silent Hill, I sadly don't have a lot of good things to say about this particular entry. For those that haven't heard of it, Silent Hill: The Short Message was a free PS5 exclusive downloadable title that released early in the year as a sort of christening for a new era of the franchise after its long absence. And it certainly does not serve that purpose well, in my opinion, if it was made with the intention of getting a new generation of players interested in what Silent Hill as a whole has to offer. It's one of those you fight one enemy for the entire game that you can't kill and just have to run away from type of games, and the single enemy you encounter is designed by Masahiro Ito and features new compositions from Akira Yamaoka. But that's just about where the good aspects of it end. The Silent Hill series is usually known for tackling some pretty dark themes, but in this case, it just boils down to, what if bullies were like mean or whatever? What if depending on social media for constant validation was like bad or something? This may take some of you by surprise, but I am in fact not a teenage girl. As a result of that, I didn't find it very compelling. Thankfully, it wouldn't be the last we'd see of Silent Hill in 2024, but more on that later.
A dark presence is wearing the old woman's face. She was covered in clinging shadows. There's a hole in her chest where her heart should be.
I honestly could make this section of the video go on for several hours. To give you an idea of how highly Alan Wake rates on my personal list of favorite games, this is not my second, third, or even fourth time playing through it. To put it simply, Alan Wake, to me, is superb. And thankfully, a sequel finally came out last year, which was absolutely worth the 13-year wait between games. I think I could talk about Alan Wake 2 for even longer, but that would be kind of cheating and doing away with the entire premise of this video to begin with, so I'll mostly leave it at that. Just be aware, if you do plan on playing it yourself, there's plenty of jank in the movement and the shooting. It can be a little bit imprecise. It doesn't control exactly like a dream, but other than that, it's fantastic. Yeah, I know. Nancy Drew. It's a game for little girls, but don't let the IP fool you. This and the rest of the series are pretty legit point-and-click adventure games, with some seriously difficult puzzles sometimes that usually range from simple logic exercises to go ahead and translate this dead language for me. Although I admit I played them mostly out of nostalgia and my enjoyment of Jerma streams. Not a lot to say other than that, so moving on. And not a lot to say about this one either. Very short, puzzle-based indie horror game. The horror aspect, I will say, is pretty weak. We've seen stuff like this pretty much done to death over the last decade or so. But the actual gameplay is not bad. I do appreciate its unique approach to gameplay in that it's puzzle-focused and not avoid completely unscary creature like the rest of these games tend to do. But anyway, that's about all I have to say.
I have a question for God. Why?
Oh boy, where do I even start with this one? Higurashi When They Cry is mostly known to those that aren't so cultured as the edgy anime where cute girls torture and kill each other. It started as a visual novel, which is what I'll be talking about here. And yes, I am counting them as games. They are released on Steam, there are achievements, etc. It's bending the rules a little bit, but I'm allowing it because I can't stop thinking or talking about this series, much to the chagrin of everyone who interacts with me on Discord. And I mean that. I am still obsessed. After I finished the main story, excluding the 2 bonus chapters this past year, I've bought statues, I started collecting the manga adaptation, and I literally bought a bookshelf from IKEA just for the manga volumes alone. And you better believe I'm not going to stop until I have every version of every manga adaptation that exists. I even went so far as to order 1 volume from a Goodwill in Wisconsin just because it wasn't in stock on Amazon. I would love to tell you that I'm joking, but that is a true story. I would like nothing more than to go on for a truly unhinged amount of time about each individual chapter, gush about the soundtrack, or tell you about how if you decide to read it yourself, you should use the 07th mod, because it's basically required to make it bearable. Because the Steam remake's art is almost worse than the original, but most of you probably aren't hardcore weebs and aren't here to hear me talk about a visual novel for 18 hours. And since what I've said so far is about as good review and a high a recommendation as I can possibly give a piece of media, I'll end this segment by saying don't be put off by the visual novel format. This is not a dating sim, it's not a romance, it's not a slice of life. It is a mystery horror story, and it had me sucked in for the entire length of its considerable word count.
Yeah, and you got cigarettes too, Stevens to that.
Yeah, no harm, no foul.
Exactly. So we're still friends.
Yeah, we're still friends.
Not much to say about this one. Honestly, it's almost cheating to count it since you can technically finish it in maybe 10 minutes, but with the multiplayer update coming out recently, I ended up putting a substantial amount of time into it. It was everywhere for a minute, so you've probably played it already if you were going to, so I'll move on. Yeah, I know this one's kind of cheating too. It's a ROM hack of Super Mario 64, but technically it is the full game. Only Mario has a shotgun, and all the ridiculous shenanigans that implies. You probably played this one too. In my opinion, the last good game developed by Bethesda Game Studios. Except for the ugliness of it and the bugginess of it, I'd say it still holds up pretty well. This was notably a shorter and smaller scale game by Yakuza standards, but it's still absolutely worth playing. This one was a real treat to play through, just a joy all the way through. A short Halloween-themed 3D platformer, this one took me about 3 hours to finish. I don't have a lot to say about this one either, except for what I can gather it was mostly made by a solo developer, so just based on that I have to give it a shout out. It didn't blow my mind or anything, but I did enjoy my time with it. One of the last Tenchu games ever made, unfortunately exclusive to the Xbox 360, although later on I learned you can play it with emulators at a higher frame rate, so that's nice. I actually wanted to replay this badly enough to plug in my old 360 and dust off my own physical copy of the game. In fact, I bought a brand new 360 controller just to do that. It's made by From Software, soon before Dark Souls, interestingly enough. It's a pretty niche game, it reviewed pretty horribly, so consider that before you go looking for a copy on eBay or something. But it's always been one I've come back to over the years, as good stealth games, in my opinion at least, are pretty few and far between these days. Yet another early access survival game, but in the jungle. Thankfully, it has enough unique mechanics, in my opinion at least, to separate it out from the rest of the pack. Although the story mode is pretty paint by numbers and not particularly interesting. I played it co-op with a couple of friends, and that elevated the experience quite a bit. So you might notice this one is number 16 and 17. That is because I immediately played it all the way through again right after finishing it. Because I absolutely adore this game, and you probably do too. It also has a mod that lets you play as Hatsune Miku and slice dudes up with a giant leek, so it's a 10 out of 10 based on that fact alone. I've been a fan of Assassin's Creed since the first one released in 2007. In other words, since before Ubisoft became the joke of the gaming industry with its bloated, copy-paste games that release one after the other. Assassin's Creed Mirage is, at the time I'm writing this, which coincidentally is Christmas morning, the most recent Assassin's Creed, and surprisingly, I rather liked it. despite thinking Valhalla, the one preceding it, was the literal worst game in the series. It's a return to a smaller scale, a Middle Eastern setting, and more of a focus on stealth assassination. It was a welcome change for me, personally, since I'm kind of tired of the overlong 200-hour RPG with copy-paste quests. As for the future of Assassin's Creed, I've got some opinions on the imminently releasing AC Shadows, but I'll save that for another time. Maybe next year's list if I quit my job and dedicate my life to playing it for the whole friggin' year. Kinda out of left field, but one of the few movie license games from the time that actually kinda rules, especially if you play it co-op. It's a solid hack and slash, but that's about where it begins and ends. An interesting curiosity. This is another game that I replay through once or twice a year. Cry of Fear is an excellent horror first-person shooter that plays sort of like a hybrid of Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and Half-Life. There's plenty of jank to be found, given that it's a gold source game made chiefly by 2 people, but the less I say about the story, the better. It's currently free on Steam, so if you're at all interested, I highly recommend giving it a shot. Coincidentally, another movie license game, but this one's more of an oddity. A mature-rated, gory hack-and-slash based on a Marvel IP, back when Marvel was capable of making things that weren't complete dirty ass cheeks. It's not going to change your life, but it's worth checking out if you're curious about it. I got the PC version on My Abandonware, and that's the one you're going to want to get too if you indeed plan on checking it out. Worked pretty well on modern hardware too. Yet another co-op survival game, but this time it's basically Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. If you remember this movie like I do, you're old, by the way. Just throwing that out there. Anyway, it was a fun time, but I don't have a ton else to say about it. Although the first Dying Light is a pretty superb game, this one unfortunately did not live up to the original in my eyes. The gameplay was tweaked in some pretty interesting ways, so it's still worth playing, but for me, that little bit of indescribable magic that Dying Light 1 had is missing here. Ground Zeroes is basically a demo for MGS5, but if Konami is going to count it as its own game, so am I. And that's basically all there is to say. It's one mission long, it's MGS5, which means it's pretty good, but certainly not worth what they were charging for it back in the day. But luckily now you can get it for pretty much nothing. The Metal Gear Solid series in general is a pretty big blind spot in my gaming history. I'll admit I haven't played through most of the series, but I can assure you I'm working my way through them, having played Metal Gear Solid 1 last year. Other than that, I've played a lot of MGS5 and maybe a couple hours of MGS3, which will absolutely be on next year's list, by the way. Whether Delta releases in 2025 or not. That and of course the aforementioned Revengeance, which to some of you hardcore Metal Gear Solid fans out there, it doesn't even count as Metal Gear Solid, but whatever. So I'll start with what I didn't like about Metal Gear Solid 2, but don't worry, there's plenty that I did, so hold your pitchforks for a few minutes. Unfortunately, I really just didn't enjoy playing it very much. The controls are pretty rough, the boss fights are thoroughly miserable, with a few exceptions, and in my opinion, it's a downgrade in a lot of ways from the first Metal Gear Solid. And no, not because you don't play as Solid Snake. That at least I had spoiled for me, so I knew I was going to be playing as Raiden the entire game, which was not an issue for me given that I'm already familiar with Revengeance. Now that the negatives are out of the way, here's what I did enjoy about the game. Literally everything else. People really don't exaggerate when they say this game's story, particularly its ending, predicted the direction America and by extension the rest of the world was going to go in the following 20 years. That fact alone makes this game worth revisiting to me, and I certainly don't regret playing it all the way through. In fact, despite my hang-ups with the gameplay, I was so hooked on this game that I played it through in one sitting. Metal Gear Solid 2 is truly a one-of-a-kind game, and I'm glad I finally experienced it in its entirety. And I look forward to playing through the rest of the series. The next one being the fan favorite Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, and hopefully 4 re-releases on modern consoles soon. Now, Raiden, turn the video off right now. Just kidding, don't. No, seriously, please don't. Also, kind of cheating to include this one, especially since we skipped a large chunk of the game using speedrunning tricks. This one's pretty self-explanatory. It's Mario 64, but co-op. Well, this is an interesting one, but if you have a friend that's willing to join you, I highly recommend giving it a go. I can almost guarantee it'll have you laughing your ass off the entire time, especially if you're the type to troll your friends. This is another one that's pretty self-explanatory. I played it through with my brother, who also knows Ocarina of Time back to front. I wouldn't count it if we weren't so aggressive with our randomizer settings, to the point where I had to keep handwritten notes to remember where all the random location warps actually took us. I have nothing too groundbreaking to say about it, but it was a really fun challenge, and I look forward to doing it again. Now I know some of you might be thinking Minecraft has an ending, and yes, it does. Kill the Ender Dragon and it does indeed roll credits, so I'm counting it. Me and my friends spent about a year on this one save, making as many different ridiculous redstone contraptions as we could possibly think of. Now I know Minecraft is kinda cringe nowadays, but ignoring the general fan base of pedophiles and autistic children, it's still a fun time with friends, if you isolate it from the greater Minecraft sphere. Man, where do I even begin with this one? Bloober Team and Konami, a match truly made in hell. Bloober Team had been consistently making, at least in my opinion, pretty crappy games. I didn't like Layers of Fear, the medium bored me to tears. To say the very least, I was skeptical when rumors first started circulating that they were going to be in charge of remaking one of the most influential pieces of horror media of all time. But I want it known that when the first teaser trailer dropped, I was pretty optimistic. And I have proof. Anyway, cut to a few years later and the game finally releases. And it's not just good, it's really good. In fact, it's so good that I've been thinking about it constantly ever since. I've been eyeballing that new Game Plus run and leaving the game installed on the PS5 for when I inevitably take the plunge and start going for the Platinum Trophy. Bloober Team may have had a pretty god-awful track record before it, but I can say without any hesitation that they have a truly excellent game under their belt now. Unfortunately, from what I hear, working with Konami was unsurprisingly a pretty miserable experience for Bloober Team, so I'll be shocked if there are any more Silent Hill games in the pipeline from them. But if this is all we get, then it's enough. And this is coming from someone who's played the original Silent Hill 2 multiple times and is a huge fan of it. The remake absolutely deserves to sit on the shelf next to it, no doubt in my mind. So here we are with another short indie horror game, but one that's meant to be replayed many times. And replay it I did, although I'm only counting it once. I play so many horror games that for a game to legitimately spook me is exceedingly rare, but The Mortuary Assistant did it, and did it more than once. I firmly recommend it if you're looking to shit your pants.
Oh my god!
Yeah, Call of Duty, I know. Call of Duty is my guilty pleasure. I've played nearly every single one of them extensively, and Black Ops 6 is one of the best ones of the last 5 years. I won't go into extreme detail with it, but especially if you're a Game Pass subscriber, it's worth the look, despite being part of a very tired franchise. A short Taiwanese horror game that was controversial upon release because of a few Easter eggs that were not so flattering towards China's communist dictator, which sadly landed the developer Red Candle Games in hot water when the references were discovered. Although, that makes it the most based game on this list by far. Unfortunately, outside of that, it's not extremely interesting to me, but on the bright side, the developer continues to make games to this day. Their most recent one has been reviewed pretty well too, so there's at least a happy ending to the story. While technically this is a DLC expansion pack, it was released at one point as a standalone game. It also took me longer to complete than some other standalone games this year, so I'm putting it here. Undead Nightmare is a really good time of rootin' tootin' zombie shooting. It also got a proper PC release recently too, so there's no reason not to check it out. Sort of the original Last of Us in a way, this game was pretty huge at the time and really put Telltale on the map for the brief period it existed. Honestly, more of a visual novel than an adventure game, but I'd still say it's worth taking another look at, despite being part of an IP that's since fallen from grace a bit. Playing The Walking Dead also made me want to revisit one of Telltale's final offerings, a Batman series. While certainly not groundbreaking or one that really stuck with me, I'm always interested in a Batman story, and this one's pretty unique. If anything, it takes the Batman mythos and plays with it in some pretty interesting ways. Ways, in fact, that the most recent Batman movie almost definitely took some inspiration from, but I won't go into that to avoid spoilers. And that is the final game I played this year. So if you're still listening to this, thank you very much for sticking with me for the whole video. I'm certainly not used to doing things like this, so if you liked it, please let me know in the comments or on Discord. If so, maybe I'll cook up some more things of this type in the future. Anyway, that's all I've got for this video. Take care, guys.